You're standing at the edge of the Bonneville Salt Flats in Utah at dawn. The world stretches endlessly white in every direction, like standing on a frozen cloud. Your footsteps crunch softly against crystals that formed when ancient seas evaporated millions of years ago. Each grain beneath your feet holds the memory of prehistoric oceans, and as the sun rises, the entire landscape begins to shimmer like scattered diamonds. This is just one face of salt, a substance so fundamental to life that without it, your heart wouldn't beat, your nerves wouldn't fire, and your body couldn't maintain the delicate balance that keeps you alive. The human body contains about 250 grams of salt at any given time, enough to fill a small coffee mug. And here's a question for you to ponder as we journey together tonight. When did you last truly notice the taste of salt? Not just as seasoning, but as this miraculous mineral that's been shaping human civilization for thousands of years. Welcome to Midnight Deep Dive, where knowledge becomes a lullaby. Tonight, we're going to explore every facet of salt, from the singing crystals in underground caverns to the superstitions that still guide our daily habits. Chapter 1: The Magic of Salt. Let's begin with wonder. Salt, at its most basic, is sodium chloride, two elements that separately could harm you, but together create something essential for life. Under a microscope, salt crystals form perfect little cubes, each one a masterpiece of geometric precision that nature crafts without effort. When you place a grain on your tongue, it dissolves instantly, flooding your taste buds with that clean, sharp flavor that somehow makes everything else taste more like itself. There's something almost alchemical about how salt works. It doesn't just add flavor, it transforms. A tomato becomes more tomato-like, chocolate becomes richer. Even water tastes different with just a pinch dissolved within it. Food scientists still marvel at this property, how such a simple compound can enhance our perception of every other taste. But perhaps most remarkably, salt has been considered magical by virtually every culture throughout history. Ancient peoples believed salt could capture memories, that each crystal held the essence of the sea from which it came. They thought it could preserve not just food, but souls, which is why salt appears in burial rituals across continents and centuries. Modern science tells us there might be something to this ancient wisdom. Salt crystals can hold tiny impurities and trace minerals that speak to their origins. Himalayan pink salt carries iron oxide from ancient mountain seas. Hawaiian black salt holds volcanic ash from islands born of fire. Each type tells the story of where it came from, preserved in crystalline memory. The magic continues in how our bodies respond to salt. That immediate satisfaction when you taste something perfectly seasoned isn't just preference. It's your cells recognizing something they need to survive. Your blood plasma has almost the same salt concentration as seawater, carrying within you the memory of life's oceanic beginnings. Chapter 2: Ancient Origins and Formation. Close your eyes and imagine traveling back 250 million years. The Earth looks nothing like today. Vast shallow seas cover much of what will become continents. These ancient oceans, warm and mineral-rich, are slowly evaporating under prehistoric suns. Day by day, year by year, century by century, the water disappears into the atmosphere, leaving behind layers of crystalline deposits that will someday feed civilizations not yet imagined. This is how most of the world's salt began, in the patient process of geological time. As these ancient seas dried up, they left behind vast beds of rock salt, sometimes hundreds of feet thick, buried under layers of sediment and time. Today, when miners descend into salt caverns, they're walking through the preserved remnants of these primordial waters. The Wieliczka salt mine in Poland feels like entering a cathedral made of crystal. Miners carved entire chapels from solid salt walls, floors, altars, even chandeliers, all hewn from deposits laid down by seas that dried up before the first dinosaur drew breath. The acoustics in these chambers are extraordinary. Sound travels differently through salt, creating an almost ethereal quality to any voice or music within these spaces. But some of the most mysterious salt formations defy easy explanation. Deep in certain mines, visitors report hearing sounds that seem to come from the salt itself, gentle ringing, like distant bells or soft humming that has no obvious source. Miners call them singing crystals, and while science suggests it might be the salt expanding and contracting with temperature changes, the sound remains hauntingly beautiful and somehow otherworldly. Above ground, salt flats create some of Earth's most surreal landscapes. The Salar de Uyuni in Bolivia becomes a perfect mirror when covered with a thin layer of water, reflecting the sky so perfectly that earth and heaven become indistinguishable. Standing there, you truly feel like you're walking on clouds, with flamingos feeding on salt-loving algae that turns the water pink as sunset. Even more mysteriously, some salt lakes appear and disappear seemingly at random. Lake Eyre in Australia can be completely dry for years, then suddenly fill with water during rare flood seasons, creating a temporary inland sea that attracts millions of birds before vanishing again into white crystal plains. Local Aboriginal cultures have stories about these phantom lakes, believing they're gateways between the physical and spiritual worlds. The formation continues today in places like the Dead Sea, where water is so salt-dense that you cannot sink. The concentration is nearly 10 times that of regular seawater, created by millennia of evaporation in a basin with no outlet. Swimming there feels like floating in liquid mercury, an otherworldly experience that ancient peoples interpreted as evidence of the sea's supernatural properties. Chapter 3: The Human Connection. Your body is, in essence, a walking ocean. About 60% water, but not pure water, salt water, with the same basic mineral ratios that mirror the ancient seas where life first began. This isn't coincidence. It's evidence of our deepest evolutionary heritage. Every cell in your body is bathed in this internal ocean, and salt is what keeps it all in balance. When you cry, you taste the sea. Tears, sweat, blood, they all carry this saline signature of our origins. There's poetry in the fact that human sorrow and joy both taste of salt, as if our emotions are connected to something as ancient as the Earth's first oceans. Different cultures have noticed this connection. In many traditions, tears are considered sacred partly because they contain this life-giving mineral. But here's where things get interesting and a little mysterious. Identical twins, sharing the same genetic code and often similar environments, can have completely different relationships with salt. One might crave it intensely, while the other finds most food too salty. Scientists are still puzzling over these individual variations. Is it learned behavior, subtle genetic differences, or something more mysterious about how our bodies remember their needs? The folklore around salt and dreams spans cultures worldwide. In Slavic traditions, placing salt under your pillow was believed to bring prophetic dreams or protect against nightmares. Some Native American practices involve sprinkling salt around sleeping areas to create protective boundaries in the dream world. While we might smile at these superstitions, there's interesting research suggesting that mineral deficiencies, including salt, can indeed affect sleep quality and dream patterns. Your body's relationship with salt is more complex than simple craving. When you're stressed, you often crave salty foods, not just because of habit, but because your adrenal glands actually increase sodium loss during stress responses. Your body intuitively knows what it needs. Athletes have long understood this, but even everyday stress triggers the same response. There's also the fascinating phenomenon of salt sensitivity. Some people can consume large amounts with little effect on blood pressure, while others respond dramatically to even small increases. This variation seems to be partially genetic, partially environmental, but the full picture remains unclear. What's clear is that our individual relationships with salt are as unique as our fingerprints. Perhaps most remarkably, salt affects not just our physical health, but our emotional well-being. Studies suggest that mild salt deficiency can contribute to feelings of depression and anxiety. The exact mechanisms aren't fully understood, but it appears that proper sodium balance is crucial for neurotransmitter function. Our ancestors might have intuited this connection. Many traditional remedies for melancholy included specific types of salt. Chapter 4: Historical Deep Dive. Salt shaped civilization in ways we're only beginning to understand. Before refrigeration, before global trade networks, before modern preservation methods, salt was literally the difference between feast and famine, between life and death. Communities formed around salt sources, trade routes followed salt deposits, and wars were fought over access to this white gold. The phrase "worth your salt" comes from ancient Rome, where soldiers were sometimes paid in salt rations, their salarium, from which we get our word salary. But this wasn't just about payment, it was about survival. Roman legions could march for weeks on salted meat and preserved vegetables, carrying their sustenance in forms that wouldn't spoil under the Mediterranean sun. The salt roads of the ancient world rival the Silk Road in their importance, though they're less celebrated. The Via Salaria, Rome's salt road, connected the capital to coastal salt works and stretched for hundreds of miles. Along these routes, entire cultures developed around salt production and trade. The wealth generated by salt funded cities, armies, and art that shaped the classical world. But perhaps no salt story is more powerful than Gandhi's Salt March of 1930. When the British imposed a salt tax on colonial India, making it illegal for Indians to collect or make their own salt, Gandhi understood the profound injustice. Salt was a basic necessity of life, needed by rich and poor alike. By walking 240 miles to the sea to make salt from evaporated seawater, he transformed a simple mineral into a symbol of freedom and human dignity. The march captured the world's imagination because everyone understood salt. Unlike complex political concepts, salt was immediate, visceral, necessary. When Gandhi picked up that first handful of natural salt from the beach, he was asserting the fundamental right to the basic necessities of life. The image of this slight man in simple clothes defying an empire with nothing but salt crystals became one of the most powerful political symbols of the 20th century. Throughout medieval Europe, salt was so valuable that it was stored in special vaults, guarded like treasure. The city of Venice built its wealth largely on salt trade, controlling the flow of this essential commodity throughout the Mediterranean. The beautiful Byzantine mosaics in St. Mark's Basilica were funded, in part, by salt profits. China developed intricate systems of salt production and taxation that lasted for centuries. The government monopoly on salt was so lucrative that it funded imperial armies and massive public works projects. Salt merchants became some of the wealthiest people in the empire, and salt trading families maintained their power across dynasties. These aren't just historical curiosities, they reveal something fundamental about human nature and social organization. Salt was perhaps the first truly global commodity, valued equally by Arctic peoples and tropical civilizations. It crossed cultural boundaries, linguistic barriers, and religious differences. Everyone, everywhere needed salt. Chapter 5: Folklore and Superstitions. There's something about salt that has always felt magical to human beings. Maybe it's the way it preserves what would otherwise decay, or how it appears from the evaporation of water like a crystalline gift from nowhere. Whatever the reason, salt has been considered protective and powerful across virtually every culture throughout history. The tradition of throwing salt over your left shoulder after spilling it is so common we barely think about its origins. The belief stems from ancient ideas about evil spirits lurking behind your left shoulder, the sinister side, literally. Salt, being pure and preservative, was thought to blind or drive away these malevolent forces. Even today, many people perform this ritual automatically, a muscle memory of ancient protective magic. Sailors developed elaborate taboos around salt. Spilling salt on a ship was considered catastrophically unlucky, perhaps because salt was so precious for preserving food on long voyages that wasting it could literally mean starvation. But the superstition went deeper. Salt was seen as protective against the chaotic forces of the sea. Sailors would sometimes scatter salt on deck before dangerous voyages, creating barriers against sea spirits and storms. Salt circles for protection appear in traditions from Celtic Ireland to Japanese Shinto practices. The idea is beautifully simple. Salt creates a barrier that evil cannot cross. In medieval Europe, people would scatter salt around their beds to prevent nightmares, or around their homes during times of plague. Whether there was any practical benefit, salt does have antimicrobial properties, or whether it was pure faith, these practices provided psychological comfort during uncertain times. The connection between salt and witchcraft is complex and fascinating. In European witch trials, salt was used both to identify witches, who supposedly couldn't touch blessed salt, and to protect against them. Accused witches were sometimes forced to swallow large amounts of salt as a test of their humanity. More positively, cunning folk and wise women used salt in healing rituals, mixing it with herbs or using it to cleanse spaces of negative energy. Salt appears in burial rituals across continents and centuries. Ancient Egyptians used salt in mummification, believing it preserved not just the body, but the soul's essence. Celtic graves often contain salt deposits, placed there to protect the deceased on their journey to the otherworld. In some Christian traditions, salt is still placed in coffins or scattered on graves as protection for the soul. The practice of blessing salt remains common in many religious traditions. Holy water often contains salt, combining the purifying properties of both elements. In Hinduism, salt is used in various protective rituals, while Buddhist monasteries sometimes use salt to mark sacred boundaries. Perhaps what's most interesting about these traditions is their persistence. Even in our scientific age, many people still feel uncomfortable spilling salt, still automatically throw a pinch over their shoulder, still somehow sense that salt is more than just a mineral. These ancient intuitions about salt's protective power seem to tap into something deeper than mere superstition. Modern research has revealed that salt does indeed have protective properties. It's antimicrobial, it helps preserve organic matter, and it's essential for cellular function. Our ancestors' reverence for salt might have been based on observed benefits they couldn't scientifically explain, but could certainly experience. Chapter 6: Around the World in Salt. Every salt tells the story of its birthplace. Like wine expressing its terroir, salt carries the signature of where and how it formed, from the pink blush of Himalayan deposits to the black volcanic salt of Hawaii. Each variety offers not just different flavors, but different experiences, different textures, different colors, different ways of dissolving on your tongue. Himalayan pink salt comes from deposits formed over 250 million years ago, when the area that's now Pakistan was covered by ancient seas. The beautiful pink color comes from iron oxide, essentially rust, incorporated into the crystal structure as the salt formed. Mining this salt is like excavating jewelry. Workers carefully extract chunks that look like rose quartz, which are then ground or carved into everything from cooking salt to lamp bases. In the coastal regions of Brittany, France, salt makers still follow traditions hundreds of years old. Fleur de sel, flour of salt, forms only under specific weather conditions as a delicate crust on the surface of salt ponds. It must be harvested by hand with wooden rakes before sunset, requiring timing and skill passed down through generations. The crystals are light and flaky, dissolving differently than regular salt, providing bursts of salinity that enhance rather than overwhelm. Hawaiian black salt, or hiwakai, gets its dramatic color from activated charcoal made from coconut shells and volcanic rock. The salt makers of Hawaii work in small batches, combining traditional sea salt with charcoal in a process that's part chemistry, part art. The result is striking: jet black crystals that provide the same salinity as regular salt, but with an almost theatrical visual impact. But some salt phenomena defy easy explanation. In certain desert regions, massive salt blocks have been observed moving across flat surfaces with no apparent cause. These moving salt rocks leave trails behind them like terrestrial crop circles. Scientists theorize that rare combinations of moisture, wind, and temperature create thin films of water that allow the blocks to slide. But witnessing this phenomenon feels undeniably mysterious. Celtic gray salt from France's Gironde region gets its color from the clay in the salt ponds where it's harvested. The salt makers, called paludiers, work in harmony with tidal cycles that have remained unchanged for over 1,000 years. The gray color isn't added. It comes from the salt's contact with the clay bottom of the ponds, giving it a mineral complexity that enhances everything from simple bread to complex sauces. Smoked salts represent humanity's endless creativity with this basic mineral. From salts smoked over cherry wood in the American Pacific Northwest to those smoked over peat in Scotland, each variety adds not just flavor, but aroma and memory. The smoking process can take days, with salt slowly absorbing not just the smoke, but somehow the essence of the wood itself. In the Danakil Depression in Ethiopia, one of the hottest places on Earth, salt workers extract salt from evaporated pools under temperatures that can reach 145 degrees F. The salt forms in perfect white terraces against the alien landscape of sulfur springs and volcanic activity. Working here requires almost superhuman endurance, yet families have been harvesting salt from these deposits for centuries. Kala Namak, or black salt from India, isn't actually black but dark purple-gray, and it doesn't taste like regular salt at all. It has a sulfurous aroma that might seem off-putting at first, but becomes addictive when used in traditional Indian dishes. The salt is made by heating rock salt with charcoal and various spices, in a process that transforms its entire character. Chapter 7: The Science of Preservation. Salt's power to preserve is perhaps the closest thing to real magic that science can explain. When you pack meat in salt, you're not just flavoring it, you're fundamentally altering the environment at a microscopic level, making it impossible for the bacteria that cause spoilage to survive. It's alchemy at the cellular level, transforming perishable organic matter into something that can last for months or even years. The process works through osmosis. Salt draws moisture out of cells, both in the food and in any bacteria that might spoil it. Without adequate moisture, bacteria can't reproduce or even survive. But salt doesn't just dehydrate. It creates an environment so hostile to microorganisms that food can actually improve with time rather than deteriorate. Consider the transformation of fresh pork into prosciutto. The meat is buried in salt for weeks, drawing out moisture and beginning a process that will take months to complete. Gradually, the salt is removed and the meat hung in caves with specific temperature and humidity conditions. Beneficial molds form on the surface, creating a protective coating, while the interior slowly transforms from raw pork into something entirely different: nutty, complex, concentrated. The same principle applies to vegetables, but here salt works in partnership with beneficial bacteria to create fermentation rather than simple preservation. Sauerkraut, kimchi, pickles. These foods aren't just preserved, but transformed into more nutritious versions of their original selves. The salt creates conditions where lactobacilli can thrive, while harmful bacteria cannot, resulting in foods rich in probiotics and vitamins that weren't present in the original vegetables. Ancient civilizations developed incredibly sophisticated preservation techniques using salt. The Incas made charqui, the origin of our word jerky, by combining salt with the dry, thin air of high altitudes. Viking traders could sail for months on preserved fish, and meat that remained edible thanks to salt curing, combined with smoking and drying. In medieval Europe, the annual pig slaughter was timed to coincide with cooler weather and salt availability. Families would preserve an entire year's worth of protein in a few days of intensive work. Every part of the animal was used, hams were salted and hung, bacon was cured. Blood was made into sausages with salt as the preservative, and even the skin was salted for later use. But salt preservation isn't just about stopping decay, it's about controlled transformation. Aged cheeses, fish sauce, salted capers, these foods become more complex and flavorful through the slow chemical processes that salt enables. The breakdown of proteins creates amino acids that enhance flavor, while the concentration of other compounds intensifies taste in ways that can't be replicated by fresh foods. Modern science has revealed just how sophisticated these traditional preservation methods really were. Our ancestors developed techniques that work at the molecular level, creating pH environments and moisture levels precisely calibrated to encourage beneficial processes while preventing harmful ones. They were essentially biochemists, working through observation and experience to perfect processes that we're only now beginning to fully understand. The psychology of preserved foods is fascinating too. There's something deeply satisfying about eating food that has been transformed by time and salt. These foods carry stories, the patience required to create them, the anticipation of waiting for them to cure, the connection to seasons and cycles that immediate consumption can't provide. Chapter 8: Salt in Nature. Nature has been conducting experiments with salt far longer than humans have existed, creating ecosystems and adaptations that seem almost impossible. In environments where most life can't survive, salt-loving organisms thrive, painting landscapes in impossible colors and demonstrating life's endless creativity. Salt lakes around the world become seasonal art galleries where nature displays its most vibrant palette. Lake Hillier in Australia is permanently pink, colored by salt-loving algae and bacteria that produce carotenoids as protection against the intense salinity. The color is so vivid it's visible from space, a bubblegum pink jewel set against the blue ocean and green forest. Animals have developed remarkable relationships with salt. Elephants will travel hundreds of miles to reach salt caves, where they carefully scrape salt deposits from cave walls with their tusks. These pilgrimages are passed down through generations, with elder elephants leading their families along ancient routes to salt sources. The caves themselves become sculpted by centuries of elephant visits, worn smooth by countless trunks and tusks. Salt licks create gathering places in the natural world, unlike anywhere else. At dawn and dusk, these mineral deposits become meeting grounds where predator and prey temporarily coexist, united by their common need for salt. Deer, elk, mountain goats, and dozens of bird species might all visit the same salt lick, creating wildlife spectacles that seem orchestrated by some invisible conductor. Plants that thrive in salty environments, called halophytes, have evolved strategies that seem like science fiction. Some actively excrete salt through special glands in their leaves, creating tiny crystal gardens on their surfaces. Others compartmentalize salt in specialized cells, using it as a structural element rather than fighting against it. Glasswort, or sea beans, become almost succulent in their adaptation to salt marshes, storing fresh water internally while thriving in soil that would kill most plants. But nature's salt phenomena can be truly mysterious. Certain salt lakes appear to predict weather changes, with colors and crystal formations shifting days before storms arrive. Local wildlife seems to respond to these changes, with bird migration patterns and feeding behaviors altering in response to something science hasn't yet identified. The Phantoms Lakes of Australia's interior are perhaps the most mysterious salt phenomenon of all. Lake Eyre and similar formations can remain bone dry for years, vast white salt pans stretching to the horizon. Then, seemingly overnight, they fill with water from distant rains, transforming into temporary inland seas that attract millions of birds. The water brings dormant organisms back to life, tiny shrimp, algae, and microorganisms that have waited years for this moment, their eggs preserved in the salt until conditions return. These temporary lakes create their own weather systems. The evaporation cools the air, creating localized cloud formations and sometimes even rain. For a few months, these accidental seas support complex food webs that exist nowhere else on Earth, then disappear again as the water evaporates, leaving behind newly formed salt crystals and dormant life waiting for the next cycle. Salt marshes represent some of Earth's most productive ecosystems, supporting incredible biodiversity in environments that seem inhospitable. These transitional zones between ocean and land pulse with tidal rhythms, creating constantly changing conditions that support specialized plants, fish, birds, and countless invertebrates. The salt concentration changes throughout the day, creating microenvironments where different species thrive. Marine environments reveal salt's role in global systems that affect every living thing. Ocean currents driven by salt density differences distribute heat around the planet, making much of Earth habitable. The thermohaline circulation, essentially a global conveyor belt driven by temperature and salinity differences, carries warm water north and cold water south, moderating climates and supporting life in regions that would otherwise be uninhabitable. Chapter 9: Cultural Significance and Hidden Wisdom. Salt has woven itself into human language, culture, and wisdom traditions in ways so fundamental we barely notice them. We speak of someone being worth their salt of the earth people, of taking something with a grain of salt. These aren't just expressions, they're linguistic fossils preserving ancient understanding of salt's value and properties. Religious traditions across the world have recognized salt's sacred nature. In Christianity, Jesus called his followers the salt of the earth, recognizing salt's properties of preservation and enhancement as metaphors for spiritual influence. The Catholic Church still blesses salt for use in exorcisms and purification rituals. In Judaism, salt is required on the Sabbath table and used in various ceremonial contexts, symbolizing the eternal covenant. Hindu traditions incorporate salt into numerous sacred practices. The phrase namak haram, literally betrayer of salt, is one of the strongest condemnations in the language, reflecting the deep cultural understanding that sharing salt creates bonds of trust and obligation. In many Indian communities, refusing to eat salt in someone's home is considered a grave insult, while sharing salt creates friendship and mutual obligation. Wedding traditions worldwide involve salt as a symbol of preservation, abundance, and protection. In some German traditions, newlyweds share bread and salt as their first meal together, ensuring their marriage will be lasting and prosperous. Slavic cultures include salt in wedding ceremonies to ward off evil influences and preserve the couple's happiness. These traditions recognize salt's dual nature as both protective and binding. The secret salt recipes of various cultures represent some of humanity's earliest intellectual property. Families guarded their salt blending techniques for generations, passing down precise ratios of salt to herbs, spices, and other minerals through carefully controlled apprenticeships. Some of these formulas have been lost entirely when families died out or when political upheavals scattered communities. Salt languages developed along trade routes, allowing merchants from different cultures to communicate about quality, origin, and price, using a specialized vocabulary that transcended linguistic barriers. These trading pigeons incorporated words from dozens of languages, but focused specifically on salt-related terms. Remnants of these specialized vocabularies still exist in port cities and traditional salt-producing regions. The salt prophets represent one of history's more mysterious practices. In various cultures, individuals claimed the ability to divine the future by reading patterns in salt crystals, the way salt dissolved in water, or the formations created when salt was scattered on surfaces. While we might dismiss these practices as superstition, they reflect a deep cultural belief in salt's connection to fundamental forces of preservation and change. Celtic druids were said to use salt in divination practices, believing that salt's ability to preserve made it a bridge between past, present, and future. They would scatter salt on sacred stones and interpret the patterns created by wind and weather. Similar practices existed in ancient China, where salt formations were read as omens for agricultural planning and military strategy. The missing salt libraries represent one of history's great losses. Various sources suggest that certain civilizations maintained detailed records about salt, its properties, sources, preparation methods, and applications. The Library of Alexandria allegedly contained extensive salt treatises, while Mayan codices reportedly included sophisticated information about salt production and trade. Most of these collections have been lost to war, natural disasters, or simple neglect. Folk wisdom about salt often contains kernels of scientific truth wrapped in poetic language. The belief that salt draws out negative energy might reflect understanding of its antimicrobial properties. The practice of scattering salt for protection might have originated from observed benefits in preventing disease transmission. These traditional practices represent accumulated knowledge that predates formal scientific method, but demonstrates careful observation of cause and effect. Modern psychology has begun studying the cultural significance of salt-sharing rituals and their impact on social bonding. There appears to be something powerful about the act of eating salt together. It creates trust, establishes social bonds, and marks the transition from stranger to friend or family member. This might explain why salt appears in hospitality traditions worldwide, and why betraying someone whose salt you've shared is considered particularly heinous. Chapter 10: Modern Salt Production. The ancient art of salt making continues today, but with fascinating variations that blend traditional techniques with modern understanding. Solar evaporation ponds create some of the most beautiful industrial landscapes on Earth, geometric pools that change color throughout the day as different microorganisms respond to varying salt concentrations. In the San Francisco Bay Area, salt ponds stretch for miles in carefully engineered terraces that look like abstract art from above. As water moves through these ponds, it becomes increasingly concentrated, supporting different communities of algae and bacteria at each level. The resulting colors range from pale green to deep red, creating a natural rainbow that shifts with seasons and weather conditions. The process is deceptively simple, but requires precise timing and constant attention. Salt farmers must monitor water levels, weather patterns, and biological activity in their ponds. Too much rain can dilute the brine, while too much heat can cause premature crystallization. The work requires a deep understanding of local conditions and climate patterns passed down through generations. Underground salt mines present a completely different world. Descending into these chambers is like entering alien landscapes carved from crystal. The Wieliczka salt mine in Poland contains entire cities carved from salt chapels, ballrooms, and artistic installations, all hewn from solid salt deposits. The air in these mines is incredibly clean, filtered naturally by salt, and many people with respiratory conditions travel specifically to breathe this pure underground atmosphere. Modern mining techniques in places like the Detroit Salt Company, mines beneath the city, involve massive excavation equipment. But the principles remain the same as they were centuries ago. Miners follow veins of pure salt through underground chambers that can stretch for miles. The temperature remains constant year-round, and the silence is profound, a cathedral-like quiet that workers describe as almost spiritual. The meditative aspects of traditional salt making attract artisans who view their work as both craft and contemplation. Hand-raking salt from evaporation ponds requires patience, timing, and a deep connection to natural rhythms. Salt makers often describe their work in almost mystical terms, talking about reading the water, feeling when the salt is ready, understanding the subtle signs that indicate perfect crystallization. Quality differences between production methods are more significant than many people realize. Machine-processed salt often includes anti-caking agents and other additives, while traditionally harvested salt retains trace minerals that affect both flavor and nutrition. The crystal structure can be different too. Hand-harvested salt often has irregular crystals that dissolve differently on the tongue, providing different sensory experiences. Some of the world's most exclusive salt comes from single sources where conditions create unique properties. Fleur de sel from specific regions of France can only be harvested under particular weather conditions, making it truly seasonal and scarce. Hawaiian Alea salt incorporates red clay found only in certain locations, while Kauai black salt requires volcanic charcoal from specific types of coconut shells. The artisanal salt movement has created renewed interest in terroir, the idea that salt, like wine, expresses the characteristics of where and how it's made. Salt makers now discuss the subtle flavor differences created by different evaporation methods, the mineral content of various water sources, and even the impact of seasonal variations on the final product. Industrial salt production serves entirely different purposes than culinary salt. Road salt for winter de-icing represents the largest use of salt in many countries, while chemical industries use salt to produce chlorine, sodium hydroxide, and countless other compounds. These industrial applications dwarf culinary uses, but they represent the same basic human need to harness salt's properties for practical purposes. The future of salt production faces interesting challenges and opportunities. Climate change affects evaporation rates and weather patterns that traditional salt making depends on. Rising sea levels threaten some coastal salt works, while changing precipitation patterns affect others. But new technologies also offer possibilities for more efficient and sustainable salt production methods. Chapter 11: Culinary Magic. The transformation that occurs when salt meets food operates at levels both molecular and mystical. Salt doesn't just add saltiness, it acts as a flavor enhancer, a texture modifier, and sometimes even a preservative, all while performing chemistry that we're still working to understand completely. When salt dissolves on your tongue, it doesn't just provide its own taste, it actually changes how you perceive every other flavor. Salt suppresses bitterness, enhances sweetness, and somehow makes umami flavors more pronounced. A perfectly ripe tomato tastes more intensely tomato-like with just a pinch of salt. Dark chocolate becomes richer and more complex. Even plain water tastes different, cleaner, and more refreshing with just the right amount of salt dissolved within it. The timing of salt application creates entirely different effects. Salt added during cooking penetrates the food, seasoning it throughout and often changing its texture. Salt added just before serving provides bursts of flavor that hit your palate directly. Salt added during different stages of preparation can draw out moisture, concentrate flavors, or create textural contrasts that wouldn't be possible otherwise. In bread making, salt controls fermentation timing, strengthens gluten structure, and enhances flavor development. Without salt, bread dough rises too quickly and develops a flat, uninteresting taste. With too much salt, the yeast struggles to work and the bread becomes dense. The perfect amount creates bread with complex flavor, good texture, and proper rise, a balance that bakers learn to feel rather than simply measure. Different salt crystals create entirely different sensory experiences. Flaky sea salt provides sudden bursts of salinity that gradually dissolve, while fine table salt disappears immediately into whatever it touches. Coarse salt adds textural interest and prolonged flavor release, while salt flakes create dramatic visual impact along with their flavor contribution. The art of seasoning to taste represents one of cooking's most subtle skills. It's not just about adding salt until food tastes salty. It's about finding the point where salt enhances all the other flavors without calling attention to itself. This requires understanding not just how much salt to add, but when to add it and what type of salt will work best with specific ingredients. Salt's role in desserts reveals its true complexity as an ingredient. A small amount of salt in chocolate chip cookies doesn't make them salty. It makes the chocolate taste more chocolatey, the vanilla more vanilla-like, and the sweetness more satisfying rather than cloying. Salt caramel works because salt tames excessive sweetness, while enhancing the rich, buttery flavors that make caramel appealing. Professional chefs often use multiple types of salt in a single dish, each serving a different purpose. They might season during cooking with kosher salt, finish with flaky sea salt for texture, and add a pinch of smoked salt for aromatic complexity. This layered approach creates depth of flavor that single salt seasoning can't achieve. The phenomenon of salt bloom on properly aged meats and cheeses represents salt's preservative and flavor-enhancing properties working together over time. The white crystalline formations that appear on the surface aren't flaws, they're evidence of proper curing, where salt has migrated to the surface as moisture evaporates, creating both protection and concentrated flavor. Cultural cuisines have developed sophisticated understanding of salt's properties. Japanese cooking distinguishes between different types of salt for different applications: fine salt for seasoning, flaked salt for finishing, and aged salt for special preparations. Korean cuisine incorporates various fermented salt products that add not just salinity, but complex umami flavors developed over months or years. The science behind salt and flavor perception continues to reveal new complexities. Salt appears to work with our taste buds and olfactory systems in ways that amplify not just taste, but aroma. When you salt a piece of meat before cooking, you're not just seasoning the surface. You're beginning a process that will concentrate flavors, modify textures, and create new aromatic compounds during cooking. Perhaps most remarkably, the correct amount of salt varies not just between individuals, but within the same person depending on circumstances, health, stress levels, and even time of day. Learning to cook with salt isn't just about following recipes. It's about developing sensitivity to these subtle variations and understanding how salt interacts with every other element in a dish. Chapter 12: Health and Balance. Your relationship with salt is one of the most intimate and essential connections your body maintains with the mineral world. Every heartbeat depends on sodium and potassium working together in precise electrical dance. Every nerve impulse requires the right salt concentration to fire properly. Every cell in your body regulates its internal environment using salt gradients that must be maintained within narrow limits, or cellular function breaks down. The human body contains about 250 grams of salt at any given time, roughly a cup of salt distributed throughout your blood, your cells, and the spaces between them. This isn't static storage. It's an active, dynamic system where salt is constantly being used, recycled, and renewed. Your kidneys alone process about 25 pounds of salt every day, filtering it from your blood, deciding how much to keep and how much to eliminate. But here's where the health picture becomes complex and somewhat mysterious. People respond to salt very differently. Some individuals can consume large amounts with minimal impact on blood pressure or fluid retention, while others respond dramatically to even small increases. This variation appears to be partially genetic, partially related to overall health, and partially dependent on factors we don't fully understand yet. The healing salts debate reflects this complexity. Throughout history, different types of salt have been credited with therapeutic properties. Himalayan pink salt is promoted for containing trace minerals. Dead Sea salt is used in spa treatments for skin conditions. Celtic gray salt is praised for its mineral complexity. While most of these benefits likely come from the trace minerals rather than the salt itself, there's ongoing research into whether different salts might indeed have different health impacts. Traditional medicine systems have long recognized salt's therapeutic potential when used appropriately. Ayurvedic medicine includes specific recommendations for different types of salt based on individual constitution and health conditions. Traditional Chinese medicine uses salt in various healing preparations, often combined with herbs or used in specific preparation methods. The modern challenge with salt lies not in salt itself, but in how much processed food has changed our relationship with it. Our ancestors consumed salt primarily from naturally preserved foods and cooking from scratch. Today, most dietary salt comes from processed foods, where salt is combined with other additives and consumed in quantities that would have been impossible in traditional diets. Your body's salt needs fluctuate based on activity, climate, health status, and individual physiology. Athletes lose significant salt through sweat and need replacement, but sedentary individuals in air-conditioned environments might need much less. People with certain health conditions need to monitor salt intake carefully, while others might actually need more salt than current recommendations suggest. The sodium-potassium balance is crucial, but often overlooked. Traditional diets naturally provided high potassium relative to sodium, primarily through fruits and vegetables. Modern processed diets often reverse this ratio, providing excess sodium and insufficient potassium. This imbalance might be more problematic than total sodium intake alone. Interestingly, some research suggests that the source and processing of salt might matter as much as the amount. Highly processed salt that's been stripped of trace minerals and combined with anti-caking agents might have different physiological effects than minimally processed sea salt or rock salt that retains its natural mineral profile. The psychology of salt craving reveals another layer of complexity. Stress increases salt loss through hormonal pathways, which might explain why we crave salty foods during difficult times. Some people seem to have heightened salt sensitivity that goes beyond simple preference. They literally taste and respond to salt differently than others. Understanding your personal relationship with salt requires paying attention to how you feel with different amounts and types of salt, how your cravings change with circumstances, and how your body responds to variations in salt intake. This individual approach to salt, based on listening to your body rather than following universal recommendations, might be closer to how our ancestors naturally regulated their salt consumption. Chapter 13: Unsolved Salt Mysteries. Even in our age of scientific understanding, salt continues to present mysteries that challenge our assumptions about this seemingly simple mineral. These enigmas remind us that nature still holds secrets, and some of the most profound mysteries might be hiding in the most familiar substances. The phenomenon of salt memory represents one of the most intriguing current debates. Some researchers suggest that salt crystals might somehow retain information about their formation conditions, the temperature, pressure, and mineral environment where they originally crystallized. While mainstream science remains skeptical, studies of homeopathic preparations and water memory research continue to raise questions about whether minerals can store and transmit information in ways we don't yet understand. Crystal healers and alternative medicine practitioners have long claimed that different salts carry different energetic signatures based on their origins. Himalayan salt is said to carry the stability of ancient mountains, while sea salt supposedly holds the dynamic energy of the ocean. While these claims can't be scientifically validated, the consistent reports from practitioners and users suggest there might be subtle differences in how different salts affect people beyond simple mineral content. The salt deposits that shouldn't exist continue to puzzle geologists. Some salt formations appear in locations where no ancient seas are known to have existed, with compositions that don't match surrounding geological formations. These anomalous deposits challenge our understanding of how salt forms and moves through geological systems. Some researchers speculate about unknown geological processes, while others wonder if these formations might preserve evidence of ancient conditions we haven't recognized. The psychology of salt addiction, beyond basic physiological need, remains largely unexplained. While everyone needs salt to survive, some individuals develop cravings for salt that seem to exceed any reasonable biological requirement. These intense salt cravings sometimes correlate with emotional states, stress levels, or other psychological factors in ways that purely physiological explanations can't fully account for. Identical twins with dramatically different salt preferences present another puzzle. Despite sharing genetic code and often similar environments, twins can have completely different relationships, with salt one craving it intensely, while the other finds normal amounts excessive. This suggests that our individual salt needs and preferences might be influenced by factors beyond genetics and environment, possibly including epigenetic factors or subtle developmental differences. The missing salt libraries represent historical mysteries that continue to intrigue researchers. Various historical sources reference extensive collections of salt knowledge, detailed treatises on salt production, trade, and applications that have disappeared entirely. The Library of Alexandria allegedly contained comprehensive salt documents, while some Mayan codices reportedly included sophisticated salt production techniques. Whether these collections ever existed, and if so, what knowledge they contained, remains unknown. Certain salt formations exhibit behaviors that seem to defy simple physical explanation. The moving salt rocks of Death Valley and similar phenomena in other desert regions continue to generate theories, but no definitive explanations. Time-lapse photography has captured these massive salt blocks sliding across flat surfaces, leaving clear trails, but the exact mechanism remains disputed. The bioluminescent properties of some salt lakes create spectacular natural light, shows that science only partially explains. While we know that certain algae and bacteria produce light in high salt environments, the timing, intensity, and patterns of these displays sometimes seem to correlate with factors beyond simple biological responses to environmental conditions. Reports of singing salt from various underground salt formations around the world describe sounds that seem to emanate from the salt itself, gentle ringing, humming, or chiming, that has no obvious source. While thermal expansion and contraction might explain some of these sounds, the consistency of reports and the often musical quality of the sounds suggest there might be acoustic properties of salt formations that we don't fully understand. The prophetic abilities attributed to salt throughout history raise questions about whether there might be detectable patterns in salt behavior that could indicate environmental changes. Traditional salt makers often claimed they could predict weather changes by observing salt crystallization patterns, color changes in salt ponds, or other salt-related phenomena. While modern meteorology provides better weather prediction, some of these traditional observations might have been based on real correlations we haven't investigated scientifically. Perhaps most mysteriously, the consistent reports across cultures and centuries of salt's protective properties suggest there might be aspects of salt that science hasn't fully explored. The antimicrobial properties of salt are well documented, but the traditional uses of salt for protection against various threats might have been based on observed benefits that went beyond simple infection prevention. These mysteries don't diminish salt's importance or challenge its known properties. Rather, they remind us that even the most familiar substances in our lives might still hold secrets. They encourage us to remain curious, to question assumptions, and to remember that scientific understanding is an ongoing process of discovery, rather than a finished catalog of facts. Chapter 14: Salt as Life. As we reach the end of our journey through the world of salt, it's worth pausing to consider just how fundamental this simple mineral is to everything we know about life. Salt isn't just an ingredient in life's recipe. It's one of the essential conditions that made life possible in the first place and continues to sustain it in countless ways we're only beginning to appreciate. Every living thing on Earth depends on salt for its most basic functions. The sodium-potassium pumps that power your nerve cells, the salt gradients that allow your kidneys to concentrate urine, the electrical impulses that make your heart beat, all of these depend on salt being present in exactly the right concentrations. Too little salt and cellular function breaks down. Too much, and the delicate balance that enables life is disrupted. But salt's role goes far beyond individual organisms. The salt content of the oceans drives the currents that distribute heat around the planet, making vast areas of Earth habitable that would otherwise be frozen wastelands or scorching deserts. Salt marshes and estuaries create some of the most productive ecosystems on Earth, supporting complex food webs that ultimately feed much of the planet's population. There's poetry in the fact that we carry the ocean within us. The salt concentration in your blood plasma is remarkably similar to that of seawater, a reminder that life began in the ancient seas and carries that heritage in every cell. When you taste your tears or sweat, you're tasting the primordial ocean that gave birth to all terrestrial life. The crystalline structure of salt reveals nature's tendency toward perfect geometric forms. Under a microscope, salt crystals display the same mathematical precision found in snowflakes, flowers, and galaxies, evidence of underlying patterns that seem to govern everything from the molecular to the cosmic scale. These perfect little cubes forming naturally from seawater seem almost too elegant to be accidental. Perhaps most remarkably, salt bridges the gap between the animate and inanimate world. It's simultaneously a mineral and a necessity of life, equally at home in geological formations and biological systems. Salt connects the story of rocks and mountains to the story of cells and consciousness, reminding us that the boundaries between living and non-living matter are more fluid than they might appear. The human relationship with salt reflects our relationship with nature itself, sometimes harmonious, sometimes exploitative, always dependent. Our ancestors understood salt's value intuitively, incorporating it into their spiritual practices, their economic systems, and their daily survival strategies. Modern life has made salt so abundant that we sometimes forget its preciousness, but our bodies haven't forgotten. Every craving for salt is your ancient biology recognizing something essential. The enduring mysteries surrounding salt, from the unexplained phenomena in salt lakes to the persistent folklore about its protective properties, remind us that even the most familiar aspects of our world can still surprise us. Science has revealed many of salt's secrets, but others remain hidden, waiting for future generations of researchers to uncover. In our technological age, there's something deeply grounding about salt's simplicity. It's the same substance that preserved food for ancient civilizations, that funded empires and sparked revolutions, that continues to be essential for every meal and every heartbeat. In a world of constant change and increasing complexity, salt remains fundamentally unchanged, still forming the same cubic crystals, still preserving food through the same chemical processes, still essential for the same biological functions it has served for millions of years. The comfort we find in properly salted food might reflect something deeper than mere taste preference. It might be our cells recognizing home, our bodies acknowledging their connection to the ancient seas where life began. When we say food that lacks salt tastes flat or lifeless, we might be speaking more literally than we realize. Salt doesn't just make food taste good, it makes food taste alive. Tonight, we've traveled together through salt's many worlds, from the glittering expanses of ancient salt flats to the mysterious singing crystals deep underground, from the protective rituals of our ancestors to the ongoing scientific discoveries that continue to surprise us. We've explored how this simple mineral has shaped civilizations, preserved food and memories, and connected us to the deepest rhythms of life itself. What emerges from this exploration is a picture of salt as far more than just a seasoning or a chemical compound. Salt is a thread that weaves through geology and biology, history and mythology, science and superstition, connecting seemingly separate aspects of existence into a unified story. Whether we're considering the salt in our tears, the ancient seas preserved in mountain deposits, or the mysterious properties that our ancestors intuited long before science could explain them, salt reveals itself as a substance that bridges worlds, the mineral and the biological, the practical and the mystical, the ancient and the eternal. As you drift towards sleep tonight, may the simple act of tasting salt tomorrow bring you a moment of appreciation for the profound complexity hidden within life's most basic necessities. Until we meet again in these quiet hours, may your dreams be seasoned with wonder, and may you find magic in the simplest gifts that sustain your days.